Good evening, Boston. My name's Amy Glenn, and I'm a managing partner with Global Retirement Partners, and I'm also co-chair of the Women on Boards 50/50 Boston's initiative, along with my co-chairs, Jessica Rassinato, Lauren Loenig, Andrea Mack, and myself. We've worked really hard to pull together an agenda that we hope you find highly valuable. First, before we get started, I have to say that Lauren was having some technical difficulties before we went to open up. And so I'm actually using her script to open up. So don't think that I'm as eloquent as she is. So I'm going to do my best to get this show kicked off. But again, thank you to our Boston co-chairs for really putting out all the time and effort that went into creating this evening's agenda. Our agenda has three parts today. First, you're going to get an update on the progress being made to increase gender balance and diversity in corporate boards. Second, you're going to hear from our VIP panel who will share their board journeys and strategies for building inclusive boards. And third, and last but not least, you have an amazing opportunity to participate in small group breakout sessions facilitated by an experienced board director who this evening include all of our panelists, in addition to two other women, Cynthia Clark, who is professor of management at Bentley University and also author of a book called Giving That Voice to Values in the Boardroom. And in addition, Christina Favola, who is an operations executive with Oculus and on the corporate boards of Priority Technology and Citizens Bank of Colorado. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. To the right of your screen, you'll see the chat box. Please feel free to leverage the interaction, your thoughts, insights, and perspectives, and if questions surface, we'll happily direct them to the panelists as we get moving. If you get disconnected, please email events@5050womenonboards.com. And again, before we move on, we really want to recognize the village that it's taken to make today a reality. One, thank you to all the women heading up our national initiative and to my fellow co-chairs and the leadership committee who have put in many hours to make this happen. We also want to extend our leadership committee members, Jean Garelick from MFS, Eileen Kiley from the RMR Group, Susan Shelby from Rhino Public Relations, and Julie Scallon, partner with Latham Watkins. Just a great group. And our global partners, EY, BNY Mellon, Bank of America, MasterCard, Citizens, McKinsey, Twitter. We have had, starting with our global conversation November 3rd and running through next week, 30 events, 24 in the United States and 6 globally, Madrid, Toronto, Athens, London. So this is just an incredible initiative, and we're really thrilled to have you part of it this evening and hope to continue to engage your interest and support going forward, because what we're doing here is so important to really engage people all around the globe to work towards diversity and inclusion on our leadership front. In Boston, we'd really like to recognize and thank our local sponsors who include Citizens Bank, MFS, Merck, DGJ Capital, Latham Watkins, Planet Fitness, TCW, Rhino Public Relations, Putnam Investments, and BlackRock. Your support and engagement reinforces the strength and commitment of our Boston community, so thank you. And thank you to everyone involved. This is just an honor to work along these amazing panelists and individuals and team. To set the stage, we are thrilled to have our co-founder, Stephanie Sonnabend, who co-founded the 50/50 Women on Boards and is chair of the board of directors. She's also former CEO and president of Sonesta International Hotels. So I'd like to welcome Stephanie, and also before we kick it over to her, recognize the incredible work that has been done by this organization. Betsy Bergmore, the founder, was instrumental in shaping the law that was recently passed in California, requiring that all public companies have at least one female board member, which has opened the door for hundreds of women to be placed on boards. And in addition, it's really having a rippling effect across the country. We're seeing different entities like NASDAQ implement requirements to their 3,000 member firms, and Goldman Sachs, et cetera. So with that, Stephanie, we're honored to have you here today. And if you could just really share with us the facts and the research that this organization pulls together so we can really move the needle here. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you to our other co-chairs, Lauren, Andrea, and Jessica. You've done a great job organizing the event here in Boston. And I'm especially delighted to be with you today because I spent nearly 60 years in the Boston area. So Massachusetts is near and dear to my heart, even though I now live in Sarasota, Florida. Mally Giro, who is also from Boston and still lives there, and I started the campaign in Boston in 2010. And it was the great response from Massachusetts women that encouraged us to take the campaign to other parts of the US and now to the world. And I have the privilege today of sharing the statistics with you. So quarterly and annually, 50/50 Women on Board use the data provided by our partner Equilar to release our Gender Diversity Index, where we analyze the percentage of women on boards nationwide by state and sector. And all this information is on our website, 5050wob.com. We also report on the percentage of women selected for new board seats, and based on those who self-identify, we report the race and ethnicity of all directors. So let's take a look at the year-over-year nationally and in Massachusetts. And we're happy to report that nationally, women now hold 25.6% of the Russell 3000 Index company boards, a 3 percentage point increase since last year, and the most significant year-over-year increase over the previous 5 years. We're at the halfway mark to women holding 50% of the corporate board seats. In Massachusetts, women hold 24.6% of the Russell 3000 company board seats headquartered in Massachusetts, nearly a 2 percentage point increase from last year. And while this is encouraging news, for the first time since we've been analyzing the data, Massachusetts has fallen below average in gender diversity. Now, I know, being a Bostonian, I know that here in Massachusetts, we don't like to be below average in anything. So I urge us all to do what we can so Massachusetts improves and becomes a leader in both gender and racial diversity. We rank the Russell 3000 company boards as gender balanced, 3 or more women on their boards, 2, 1, or 0 women on their boards. And as of the second quarter 2021, 215 out of the 2,987, or 7% of the Russell 3000 companies have gender balanced boards. This is a great increase from 2020, when only 5% of the corporate boards were gender balanced. Likewise, companies with 3+ women on their boards have increased, and companies with 2, 1, and 0 women have decreased. So we're moving the needle in the right direction. In Massachusetts, 12 out of the 216 companies, or 6%, are gender balanced. You see 3+ have increased, and companies with 1 and 0 have decreased. So again, Massachusetts as well is moving in the right direction. So for all companies to be gender balanced in Massachusetts, company boards will need to add between 414 and 735 women, depending on whether a woman replaces a man or a seat is added. So there's ample opportunity for women to join boards. In addition to advocating for gender balance on boards, our mission is to ensure boards are diverse and that women of color hold at least 20% of all board seats. So out of the total directors who serve on publicly traded boards, only 17% self-report their race and ethnicity. And of that, 12% of directors are people of color, which breaks down to 4.5% women and 7.4% men, which is extremely low. Furthermore, the percentage of people of color by race and ethnicity on boards is even more sparse. If this chart is hard to read, it's because the percentages are dismally low. We can and we must do better. And with the added focus of people of color on corporate boards, I anticipate that this will improve. What is encouraging is that of the 1,450 women and 2,075 men who joined a Russell 3000 board in the past year, 25% are reported as people of color. So that's a big increase from the 12% of the entire group. So that breaks down to 12% women and 13% men. At 50/50 Women on Boards, we call for companies to be intentional when searching for diverse board candidates outside of their current networks. We encourage all board directors to also self-identify by claiming or creating their Equilar Board Edge profile. And the link will be in the chat. So if you are a director, please go to that site and make sure that that Equilar knows your race and ethnicity. And likewise, men and women in seats of power need to serve as allies and advocate for women, especially women of color. These results are far from our goal of women of color holding 20% of the corporate board seats and all women holding 50% of board seats, which is why the conversation we're hosting and the educational training and impactful interactive programs offered by 50/50 Women Boards are essential to generating further awareness, education, and collaboration. This year in December, we're running the final sessions of our Path to the Boardroom for mid-career women and one additional Get on Board workshop for board-ready women. So check out our website to see if you would like to do one of those programs. And next year, we're revamping our programs to offer more options for early, mid-career, and senior women. So check back with the new offerings in 2022. So let me now turn the conversation back to Jessica to introduce our VIP panel. And it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. It's really encouraging to see that we're making progress both nationally and in Massachusetts, although clearly there's more work to be done. I'm really delighted to be here this evening to introduce the second portion of our production tonight, the VIP panel. Today, we're really honored to welcome Maria Rivas to be our moderator for the program. Dr. Maria Rivas is currently the Chief Medical Officer for EMD Serrano, and Maria also serves as a director on the board of Cooper Industries and on the national board of 50/50 Women on Boards. We're really fortunate to have her this evening as our moderator, and at this time, I'm going to pass it to you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. And the pleasure is mine. The honor is mine because we have such a distinguished and powerful panel. I will let each of them introduce themselves so that you can be blown away. Their experiences really essentially could not be quantitated, I'm sure, here or calculated. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So why don't I start with Janet, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, Marie. My name is Janet Robinson. I am the retired CEO and board member of the New York Times Company. I currently serve on a wealth management firm board by the name of Steward Partners Global Advisory. I'm a chairman of their comp committee and a member of their governance committee. And I'm also a board member for Ocean Point Financial Partners, which includes Bank Newport and Ocean Point Insurance. I'm a member of the Comp Committee, the Risk Management Committee, and the Strategic Planning Committee.
Thank you, Janet. Carol. Oh, Carol, I think you're on mute.
Geez, you'd think I'd know better at this point. Anyway,
You'll do it.
I'm so delighted to be here. So thank you, everybody. I'm Carol Jeremiah. I'm president of MFS, head of global distribution. I spend a great deal of time around the world talking to boards as our clients, many of them sit on boards, public companies, private companies. I sit on the MFS corporate board, and I sit on several nonprofit boards as well. And I've been at MFS now for 37 years.
Thank you, Carol. John?
Thanks, Maria. Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here this evening. I am John Ria. I'm a partner with Centerview Partners. I'm based in our New York office, where I run our equity advisory business as well as our real estate platform. I currently serve on 3 boards, 2 of which are public companies, Invitation Homes and State Street. At Invitation Homes, I'm currently on the investment committee, and I chair the compensation and management development committee. And at State Street, I serve on the strategy committee and the technology and operations committee. And I'm also a member of the board of Whistle Pig, which is an independent private company. where I chair the audit committee.
Thank you, John. And then last but not least, Inshallah.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Inshallah Anderson, and I am currently at Google. I am part of the cloud division and lead both brand strategy and creative development for the Google Cloud brand. I am newer to the board experience, and I sit actually just on one board, which I joined during right before the pandemic. So it's been a little bit of a journey. But nevertheless, I serve on the board for Planet Fitness and was super excited, just as we were talking about the stats, that I was not the first woman, not the second woman, but in fact the third. So it was amazing to kind of join sort of a circle of board members that included other women as well. And then in terms of kind of my responsibility there, I chair the compensation committee.
Wonderful, Inshallah. Thank you. And let me start with you, actually. Let's warm up. And first of all, what a warmer, there's no warmer way to introduce ourselves than through relationships, right? And to build relationships. It's probably the most crucial way to the board, right? The fastest way, I would say, to the board, and the only way is through relationships. So how do you recommend for colleagues here on the call on this webcast to start connecting and building those relationships that can lead to a path to the board?
So I'm going to focus on this two different ways. I think firstly, one, relationships are critical. I think I found my path to the board through a relationship. But I also want to emphasize, as we look to try and bring change, that we have to make sure that our relationships afford objectivity and help us see, like, even within our personal network, do we have a blind spot? Are we actually kind of recommending people that are additive to the table versus more of the same? And so from my vantage point, I think it's so critical just to firstly make sure when there is an opportunity or a seat for a board that's available, being really clear about what are the gaps that we're trying to fill. And in doing so, you almost write like a job description for the role. And that allows people to then tap into their network, because relationships do matter, to see, do they have someone in mind that could fill those gaps? But also perhaps maybe recognize that their network is insufficient and it means going a little bit more broad. And that may mean a search firm or other mechanisms to ensure that you're casting the net wide enough to bring people into the fold. I think as well, as you sort of talk about the importance of relationships, I talk about boards all the time to people, and especially women, because I don't think they even consider it. When I was first approached, I thought like, huh? I don't know. I'll have to get back to you. I mean, I was really, it was not something that was sort of within my aperture of consideration. And so to that end, as I sort of talk about it, I think I was walking around the office today and I mentioned it several times, the panel that I was participating on this evening, because for it to be considered, it has to be in the consideration set. And that means driving awareness of the opportunity. You know, whether that's engaging with organizations like 50/50 Women on Boards, whether it's taking advantage of some of the educational opportunities a lot of business schools are offering to encourage women to consider boards, or other national organizations. I think it's so key to sort of put yourself out into that network to learn, but also to sort of communicate your interest and desire so that as opportunities arise, you can be considered. So, you know, as I mentioned, just in summation, I think one, it's important to make sure that when there is a search, there's objectivity so that we can not just think about cultural fit, but cultural additive candidates. And then in addition to that, for potential candidates, it's getting out there and learning about the opportunities and sort of communicating your desire.
I think that is so important, both aspects, both if you're a candidate looking for a board, as well as if you happen to already have a seat at the board, a voice, either in the executive management or the board itself, to try to make that board composition even more diverse. And John, since we're on the topic of relationships, let me jump to you for a moment and talk a little bit about strategic networking, because we hear a lot about how networking is so crucial to getting on a board. And but people sometimes don't associate relationships with networking. and sometimes also find networking perhaps difficult. I mean, for some folks it comes naturally, for others it's more difficult. Do you have any words of wisdom here?
Happy to contribute to that one because my first board opportunity came about through networking, through my network, and I'll unpack this a little bit because it wasn't the way I thought it would come about. So in a desire to try to expand my network and be visible, particularly in the community of other directors and people who make decisions and influencers on who gets on board, I think, a lot of the things that one would anticipate would lead them in the right direction. So, for example, I went to Stanford Directors College, had not only the training around what it is, what governance is about, but also within the room, for a couple of days with, other existing board members and directors and people who were looking to be placed on boards. I, did a number of strategic lunches with executive search firms and the partners that had those practices that do the board searches for Fortune 500 companies, thinking that would be the way the network would work for me. And in the end, none of that mattered. It didn't produce a single call over a number of years. But then a relationship with a former client of mine, I developed a personal relationship with when I left banking and decided to do a stint in the public sector. And in that role, he and I had an opportunity to work together on a project on advancing charter schools in New York City, in which he was a very big supporter of a particular charter school network. And through that work, we became close, but in a non-traditional way, in the sense that it had nothing to do with the way I thought I'd find my way onto a board. And as I was leaving government to come back into the private sector, we had a conversation. And in that conversation, we asked what I wanted to do next. And I told him, well, I was going to try entrepreneurship, but I wanted to keep a foot in the corporate world. And the conversation then steered to, have you considered serving on board? To which I said, actually, it's something that I'd love to incorporate into my career, but I haven't had the opportunity to do it yet. And he said, well, I have something in mind for you. And so that is, two messages I think, that are takeaways, for folks who are listening today. One is that, your day-to-day job may provide you with certain visibility, and your traditional networks may lead to an opportunity, but often you get to demonstrate valuable skills when you're working on passion projects or when you're volunteering outside of your day-to-day role. And then secondly, I think it's good to be intentional about your interests. The fact that I told him that I wanted to keep a foot in the corporate world and that board service would help me facilitate that, it gave him an opportunity to make it happen for me.
Yes, and I actually want to pick on that topic, John, because I think you're right. You need to, first of all, educate yourself about board service before you go about communicating that you want to be on a board, because being on a board is a big responsibility. And definitely, you need to, be able to present what will be your value add in that board setting. So to that point, Janet, I mean, what are the kinds of value add expertise that boards are seeking right now in the industry?
Well, I think there are many, but I think they've changed in recent years, primarily because our world has become much more digital. So I guess I'll start with that. The digital expansion value added experience, I think, is very treasured by boards these days. I think that pertains to product development. It pertains to a richer user experience, backroom efficiency, and certainly data analytics. And you can name any company that would benefit from that kind of expertise on the board. Cybersecurity is one that I've run into quite a bit recently in regard to that being a treasured expertise that is sought after. Entrepreneurship, I think, is also one that is coming to the forefront in regard to requests from boards, because many digital in the world of media, many digital startups are part of large companies now, and in the financial service industry, certainly fintechs are either being absorbed or they're competing with them directly. So many entrepreneurs, I think, are becoming very attractive for board service. because boards are requesting that kind of thinking in the boardroom, to advise in regard to creativity, to advise in regard to innovation. International experience, Maria, is always going to be important, and I think that still is. The one that seems to be coming up more often also is regulatory. There are many connections that are very valuable when we're talking about any industry that is concerned about regulatory issues. So I think that is one that seems to be on the forefront as well. And certainly strategic communications, with everyone being very concerned about social media, what's being said about corporations on social media, crisis management that many corporations have to deal with. It is very important, I think, to have that skill set on a corporate board. It becomes very valuable when the going gets tough. And I think these days, crisis, unfortunately, is part of a CEO's job.
I think that is such a great summary there, Janet, of the many types of expertise that are highly sought after for board positions. These are very unique, oftentimes, depending on the company, the life cycle of that company, the particular industry. You may find that sometimes there's a higher demand for one expertise or the other. I wanted to really pick on what you said, Janet, a couple of themes here, very pertinent to the Boston area. If there are any colleagues out there who are from the technical world, particularly science, research and development, we have a very, active biotech and startup situation here, entrepreneurial or enterprises here in the Boston area. So not often are technical experts sought after for more traditional boards in more traditional industries, but definitely for the biotech and startup world. There are some colleagues out there with some scientific and drug development backgrounds, commercialization background, and even regulatory background that may be highly sought after. I also want to pick on something you said, with this topic of, the crisis being the new normal, sometimes in the boardroom, or for industries in general. The topic of environmental, social, and ESG essentially, and governance, and where does that fall, and does that create actually more opportunities for women? Carol, I'm wondering if you have a thought on that in particular.
Well, absolutely. ESG sustainability has become a tsunami, quite frankly, across every industry, every company. And as an asset manager, we're in a position of investing in companies and basically owning businesses, being a shareholder of these companies. And it's a unique advantage in that it basically gives you a tremendous amount of influence and to impact change of public companies. And so, as we see the world unfolding around ESG, as we actually think it applies to every business on the planet. But when we think about owning great companies on behalf of our clients, we're focused on management. We are focused on the makeup of their boards. We're focused on their culture. We're focused on these things that we believe actually make great businesses and ultimately generate long-term results. So everything that we're talking about in this huge movement to more diversity on boards, there is a tremendous amount of pressure coming from the asset management industry, especially the active management industry, where we are engaged with companies, not to exclude them and say there's bad and good companies. Certainly there are, but it is about the transition and being very close to these companies to help them make change. And so one of the things that we've instituted in ensuring that not only can we engage and partner with companies to change and become more diverse and inclusive, but we've now even put strict policies in our proxy voting policies to say that if public companies don't have a minimum amount of diversity in their boards, we're going to very explicitly vote against management. And that kind of pressure, I think, for everybody that's listening, opens up a tremendous amount of opportunity of what's coming down the pike. And this is not going to stop. We're not going to go backwards on this. And so you've got the investment asset management industry recognizing that we have to be very, very involved in making public companies change. But as we hold public companies accountable, it also requires us to hold ourselves accountable and to hold the same type of mirror on ourselves. If we're pressuring public companies to make this kind of change, that we can actually walk the walk as well. And so I just think as an industry, as the investment management industry, the opportunities are enormous. And then I think, again, what's playing out in the public markets and even the private markets is the pressure is not going to be let up. And so people need to be really prepared and excited, I think, about the opportunity that boards and management are going to become more diverse. They're going to have to. They'll have no choice.
Yeah, no, Carol, I think you're absolutely right. And Janet, we've been seeing a lot of activity, from Credit Suisse, I mean, to Carol's point, BlackRock, and lately NASDAQ. And then together with these laws that are coming up in California, which have really, as Stephanie summarized, influenced and really moved the needle with women and people of color participation on the boards. What do you think is next? Where do we take this? Is this really going to be a national phenomenon? Can we see something like that in Boston and in Massachusetts?
I think it's coming. And what I would add on is just, and I loved what people have said so far, is now what we have to do is really make sure that we have the pipeline and we've got people well prepared to step into these roles, because it's about the right fit. It's making sure that we're just not making boards diverse for the sake of simply diversity. We've really got to be able to have a voice. We've got to be able to feel comfortable and confident in those board positions, and to make sure that we really prepare people to step forward.
Yeah, I agree. Janet, what do you think?
I agree. I agree with Carol. I think that, we have to make sure that we have very well qualified folks that are being selected for these board seats. It certainly, I think, sends a very good message with the success that women have had on boards. And I think that will only continue. I also agree with Carol that this is not going to end. This is definitely a movement that has taken hold and will expand as time goes on. When you mentioned BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and CalPERS and a variety of institutional investors, they have definitely put the pedal to the metal in regard to requesting more transparency as far as board membership. And that visible, request for transparency, I think, has forced, or I shouldn't say forced, but encouraged the proxy firms, ISS and Glass Lewis, to take a very strong look at board membership and highlight it to all of their corporate shareholders, the ones that they cover. So consequently, corporations can't run away from this. They have to address it. If they are concerned about their own shareholder satisfaction and their own transparency, they must address it. So I think progress is being made, maybe not as fast as we would all like to see it, but I really do think that we're on a stronger path. But it's also critical to note when BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and CalPERS, they have shareholders and they have investors and they have constituents that they have to answer to too. To Carol's point, it's not just looking at other corporations and encouraging transparency there. Many of the institutional investors really have to look at themselves to show their commitment to diversity and inclusion as well.
I would imagine. And John, what is the industry doing? Maybe it looks like you wanted to comment to actually promote, catapult the women of color into these roles that can ultimately not just be executive management, but also board members.
Well, two things. Before I comment on that specific question, I wanted to just kind of support what Carol and Janet were sharing with us about institutional investors. Obviously, being a director at State Street, I get to see this play out, up close and personal, just given that one of our, largest divisions is State Street Global Advisors. And so we are one of those institutional investors that have been pushing for this change. And State Street really began pushing hard back in 2017 as part of the Fearless Girl campaign, which many of you may be familiar with on Wall Street. And so that really that initial focus was around gender diversity. And State Street made the decision through SSGA to vote against any nom and gov chair at a company that didn't have a woman, at least one woman on its board of directors. And that was companies in our indices throughout the major markets around the world, not just in the US. And then more recently, State Street Global's advisors expanded that now to deal with racial justice. And so in 2020, we tasked with SSGA to focus on helping to kind of support best practices around DE&I throughout corporate America and in the UK. And so in 2022, we've announced that we will withhold votes in the proxy season against any company that doesn't have a person of color on their board. So we've been taking action as an institutional investor, but again, to Carol's and Janet's point, you can't just kind of point the finger. The old saying right there, when you point the finger, there are three pointing back at you. And so State Street's worked really hard to make sure that we have diversity throughout the company, but also at the board level. And so, of our 11 independent directors, almost half, 5, are diverse, 3 women, including our lead independent director, and 2 people of color. And we, as part of the kind of pushing this effort around people of color, State Street implemented 10 actions against racial injustice, against racism and injustice. And it's basically inequality. And it's basically to focus on holding ourselves accountable in a very public way. So these 10 action items were made very public. And we're making sure that not only are we being held accountable by making it public, but hopefully by sharing what we're doing, it encourages many of our peer companies to do the same.
This is very encouraging, John. And I wonder, inshallah, you're in the technology world where you live in Google. And, what kinds of actions are companies taking to really, again, provide a path for women to continue to advance, particularly from underrepresented groups?
This happens in a couple of different ways that I'm seeing in the technology space. I think the first part is access. And so we want to make sure that we're creating access for people to kind of come into the fold. I started my career in financial services, and I remember, working at JP Morgan and the real push to diversify Wall Street. I think in a very similar fashion, we're sort of seeing that push to diversify tech happen. And it's racial, it's gender, it's LGBTQ+. There is a strong imperative to make sure that the funnel is open and we're really drawing in kind of a range of talent. That is very important. And it's not just sort of thinking about the cohort of today, but that access sort of dips back to thinking about what's the next generation of talent? How do we cultivate people who are interested in technology? So that's programs with high schools, that's programs at the college level, that's summer programs and internships and such. But I think that gives us a broader cohort to draw from, because the easiest response is we couldn't find anyone. They're not enough. And I think, one, you have to really pressure test that statement because it's often not true. You're not looking as broadly as you can, but I do recognize the importance that talent needs to be grown, that it needs to grow in number. And so from an access perspective, that's really critical. I think the other part is, okay, you get in the door. How do we make sure that those individuals advance? And that's where, particularly at Google, I think they've done a really great job making sure that we have ERGs that really work in sync with these underrepresented groups. I, for example, am a member of the Black Googler Network, but I'm also a member of OLAV, which is our Hispanic network. And so, even the ability to kind of have that community that you can tap into becomes really, really critical. But I would say through the ERGs, you're seeing more instances of mentorship, of buddy programs, of sponsorship, of great opportunities, or exposing people to different things that are happening at a broad company. And that's really important because it's not just bringing them in, it's retention. And retention is really fueled by creating a sense of belonging. So people have something that they're staying for versus running to something new that they're leaving to join. So those ERGs can be really grounding, but it doesn't stop there. I think this has to be one where, and I've appreciated this, it is the agenda of all. It's not just the agenda of women. It's not just the agenda of a specific underrepresented group, but it becomes sort of an action item that sits with many so that really change can happen at scale.
I agree, inshallah. I wonder if maybe now we can, slightly switch gears and just talk about a bit of what is it to sit on a board and experience a more diverse board. Carol, Janet, I don't know the specific circumstances of when you started actually taking on board seats or interacting significantly with the boards in your companies. But what did you notice? I mean, in particular, let me start with Janet. What did you notice as some, unique aspect that you had not noticed perhaps in a less diverse board?
Well, at the Times Company, we had a very diverse board, and it is still a very diverse board. And the boards that I'm on now are diverse with women and minorities that are on both boards. But what I noticed with women on boards, really from the start, was that they approach board service in almost a forensic manner. They dig very deep. They do their homework, which is always a good thing. They always, when you're looking at results, they don't just accept the results. They look at the how and the why behind results. So they dive very deep into, management control of the results that they are looking at. I also saw that, and this continues, that they have a very deep appreciation for knowing the customer. And I think sometimes that gets short shrift in the boardroom, whereas I think women really dig very deep in regard to that. They are very focused on employee engagement, to, Anchela's point, in regard to how people are being retained, how they're being developed, how people have that sense of belonging. I think women are very apt to ask those kind of questions in the boardroom. And I also think that, from a financial perspective, and this goes, to the forensic point, they dig very deeply into really what the financial performance is. I think there is certainly enough research that's proven that they ask a lot of questions regarding investment. They ask a lot of questions in regard to the return on that investment. And they are very focused on fraud and how indeed the company is performing when it comes to auditing procedures. So I think it goes back to what I said about that forensic approach to board service.
Very sounds methodical and applying data-driven, let's say, evidence-based. Yeah, Carol, what about you? What's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I always say, I've been at MFS for a long time, so I know nothing else. But it's, I think for us is we've always had a very strong culture that has believed in a diversity of thought, really looking at everything from every angle possible and to uncover something that you can't see. And so I think that's always been a tenet in the culture of the firm, not to mention collaboration and sort of the fact that to get to the best information, you've got to have collective intelligence. And what I've found as a woman on the MFS corporate board, but also in our mutual fund boards, is that the element, and obviously I'm biased on this, but I do think that there's a whole nother level of reducing risk that diversity of boards bring. And we love to build a strong team on boards. But people underestimate the importance of diversity of thought in reducing risk. And it's one of the most powerful things that I think boards get when they have more women on boards, more diverse candidates on boards. because they do have that collective view. And I would say also that I've noticed in terms of maybe the tenant or the tone is also valuing a long-term view and pushing back on short-termism. Our biggest war is on, and almost every business in America and in the world, is the war on short-termism. And it's why we've got ESG problems. And so I think diversity on boards start to fight that head on in a way that I don't think we have in a very, very long time. And so, I think that raises the higher order of the purpose of boards and what they bring to the table as long as they tap into that diversity of thought.
I agree, Carol. As someone who in my line of work often deals with risk management and risk evaluation, I have to say, even in my workplace, I have valued and benefited from the diverse views of a group of individuals with different backgrounds and expertise. I wonder, in the last few minutes, since we just have 5 minutes, John and Inshallah, you probably, like me, have been in situations where you're the first to walk in that looks like you into an executive or board situations. Can you describe a little bit? Let's start with Inshallah for a moment here. Inshallah, what if anything that has felt? It sounds like you were blessed. Your first board experience is very, very balanced. A lot of women on the board. What does that? How do you deal with that and recommend others to do so?
Yeah, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, my circumstance coming onto the Planet Fitness board, it was refreshing not to be the only. And I think many of us, whether gender, race, we've had that experience of being the only. So it was a welcome change to join the table and have two other women there, amazing women that had served on the board for a while and are on other boards, so that I could learn from them. No one gets where they are, if you're in an underrepresented group, joining circles where there's many. And I think you become very comfortable with sort of sometimes soldiering it alone. But, for me, I think part of the task is always thinking about, how do I open a door or open a window? Because it's so critical that while I might be the first or I might be the only, I don't want that to be the permanent circumstance. And so thinking about how we feed the pipeline or create opportunity so that ultimately, the table expands, the representation shifts, and that, at the end of the day, we're representative of, the communities that we serve or the consumers that buy our products. Ideally, it should sort of look like our consumers. It should look like our customers. That is one of the big sort of pushes that we have at Google as we think about our employees and our management team, is we want, a population reflective of the types of consumers that buy our products. It helps us kind of address some of the, the gaps in terms of ensuring that we have a comprehensive offer.
And it will make your business even more successful if you address your customers' needs holistically. Yeah. John, in the last minute or so, any comments on your end of how was it for you to change that, be the first perhaps if you were, or if not, how do you meld with the board culture?
Yeah, so on my first board, I was the first and I'm still the only person of color on that particular board. Although we've worked really hard to build up our gender diversity on the board, we actually now have 3 women over the past few years that we deliberately and intentionally added to the board to diversify what was obviously an all-male board prior to that. And we've made it very clear that both in terms of our C-suite and the board, racial diversity is now the priority as we look to add other specific skills too in a diverse context. So I'm pounding the table, and the board has got a lot of religion around addressing it. The nice thing about State Street, when I joined State Street though, I joined with another person of color, who happens to be Latino. So it's nice to have another person of color at the table, but I see my job. It sounds like we all do, right? Is creating opportunities for others and not being the first and the last. And when I think about particularly with respect to kind of this topic, 50-50 women on boards, I look at State Street and my other boards. There's a lot of good work going on there. And so, for example, in ensuring that, women are mentoring each other. And so, for example, at State Street, there's leading women where all the senior women get together and recommend each other for opportunities. We also do a lot of work of placing women on boards of not-for-profits. And then lastly, of using our mutual fund boards as a place to actually get women on boards. And those are opportunities to make sure that we're not the only ones. And that's where I think there's been a lot of great work, and I've been able to be involved with it, some of it within our companies and some outside of the company. So, for example, with Executive Leadership Council, where I was a member for many years, we focused a lot on creating diversity in boardrooms. There's another organization called the Council of Urban Professionals, which works with younger mid-level career people and helping get them their first opportunities with not-for-profit boards to develop a resume so that they can get into the boardroom. So the goal is really to kind of develop the pipeline behind us.
John, and I want to say just in closing, pay it forward is, I think, one of the elements I've seen in the women that are part of the 50-50 Women on Boards effort, the really generous individuals who planned this event tonight. And definitely every panelist here committed to trying to open that window, as you said, inshallah, open that door. I have to say I was blessed. I would be remiss by saying that I've joined, like inshallah, I've been a board director in only 2 boards, 2 public boards, definitely other nonprofits. One of them, I was the first woman, and I joined a wonderful group of gentlemen who were extremely gracious, welcoming, open, trusting, and a really great board. And then the second board now, it's a gender balance board. Again, a group of extremely experienced individuals, very open, and a lot of excellent role models and colleagues there. So I hope for everybody in the audience that there are similar journeys for you in the future, if not currently. And with this, I just wanted to thank again the organizers and the panelists for their gracious participation and words of wisdom. And I turn it back to Jess and Amy.
Thank you. What a powerful, powerful conversation. I don't know about the 130 of you in the audience, but I am just feeling so energized and inspired and hopeful for the future. And this conversation is not over. So the second part of this, or the third part of this agenda is our esteemed panelists are now moving into their individual rooms that you've been assigned, in addition to Christina Favela and Cynthia Clark, where you can have a more intimate conversation with these esteemed leaders to talk about, helping you along your board service journey. And in closing, I just cannot thank Betsy and Stephanie and the leadership at Women on Boards 50-50 for really leading this necessary initiative. And specifically to the crew that's on this call today, for whatever reason, Women on Boards 50-50 was founded in Boston, and it has just historically been a laggard city. So we are all about changing that. And all of you on this call today are the pipeline that Carol was referring to. So we really encourage your continued support. We hope, going into next year that this will be a live event. And, what you can do, after today, we encourage you to reach out to any of the co-chairs on today's call or myself to just learn more about the organization, help us spread the word about getting more sponsorships. We'll be looking to recruiting another top tier panel next year. And I think, Kat, I don't know if you can cue to the next step. Yes. To our local sponsors, this wouldn't have been able to happen without you, and we got a record number of people on today's call. So we hope that you continue your journey with us next year. And again, as far as what you can do after today, number one, get on your breakout call and take advantage of having, some intimate time with these incredible people. And, second of all, you can subscribe to the newsletter. You're welcome to talk to anyone on our leadership committee, or again, reach out to us about being on the leadership committee. And with that, joining your breakout is really easy. So if you look over, oh, and I should mention that Betsy mentioned in the chat, there are also very specific board workshops that you can also enroll in. As you can see, there's some very specific data and ways to present yourself to have a successful, journey to get yourself on a board. So please take advantage of all these resources, help us grow this initiative, help us get some legislative change here in Massachusetts, and work towards a brighter future. So to get into your breakout rooms, if you look over to the left of your screen and click on agenda, you'll see your breakout room, and just click join now. And if you have any issues accessing the breakout room or get disconnected, email events at 5050womeninboards.com or WOB.com. And let's get going. I hope everyone's ready to learn, share, and connect, and I hope to see everyone soon. Thank you.